Every morning before work, I'd sit in my car in the parking lot, staring at the glass doors of Halcyon Venture Systems, trying to breathe myself into calm. I already knew what waited for me inside. My boss, Victor Lang, had a voice that could slice through walls, and he loved nothing more than making me his target. It was like he woke up each day wondering how he could humiliate me next. The moment I stepped through those doors, I could feel his eye. When I first started at Halcyon, I was hopeful. I thought I'd finally found a place where hard work mattered, where numbers spoke louder than egos. But with Victor in charge, it didn't take long for that hope to get crushed. He had this way of making every win of mine feel like a mistake. The first big project I worked on, a cost savings model that ended up saving the company $250,000, was supposed to be my chance to prove myself. Instead, Victor reassigned the credit to one of his favorites. My name was nowhere on the final report. I remember sitting there in the meeting, listening to him praise someone else for the hours I had poured into it. And I felt the sharp sting in my chest. It wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. After that, things only got worse. He moved my desk, twice, first from the main floor to the corner, then, eventually, near the supply closet, as if I didn't even deserve to be part of the team. He made a joke about it too, loud enough for the whole office to hear. "Learn where you belong, Ava," he said, smirking, like pushing me into the shadows gave him some twisted satisfaction. My coworkers pretended to laugh, but I could see the unease in their faces. No one dared to challenge him. Victor made sure of that. There was one night I stayed late, finishing up reports for a client. When I left the building, the cleaning crew was already vacuuming the halls. My computer screen glowed with the work I'd been slaving over, and I thought, maybe tomorrow he'll finally see what I'm worth. The next morning, Victor barely glanced at the file before tossing it onto the table. "You call this polished?" he snapped. I stood there, biting my tongue, because I knew if I said anything he'd find a way to twist it back on me. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the employee stock purchase plan paperwork I'd signed months ago. It hit me that if Victor wouldn't see my value as an employee, maybe I'd prove it another way. Quietly, carefully, I started buying shares. At first, just a few here and there, nothing dramatic. But when the company hit a rough quarter and the stock dipped, I bought more. Every paycheck, a little chunk went straight into ownership. I even tracked down former employees, people who had been burned by Victor and were eager to cut ties. They sold me their small blocks of shares without hesitation. Piece by piece, I was building something Victor couldn't touch. I kept it all in a plain manila folder labeled Ops, tucked under my keyboard where he'd never bother to look. By spring, I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a shareholder, one with more influence than Victor could imagine. And while he spent his days trying to tear me down, I was quietly, silently, building the very thing that would bring him down. The quarterly all-hands meeting was always Victor's favorite stage. He thrived on those moments, standing in front of the entire staff, strutting like he was untouchable. That Friday morning, the tension in the air was thick. People shuffled into the auditorium with their coffees, whispering about what Victor might pull this time. I sat near the middle, notebook in hand, my heart steady but heavy. I knew he had something planned. He started with his usual fake smile, cracking a joke that didn't land. Then, without warning, he clicked to a slide that had my name in bold at the top. "Today," he announced, his voice booming through the microphone, "we're addressing a serious culture fit issue." My stomach tightened, but I kept my eyes forward. I could feel the way people shifted in their chairs, the uneasy silence that settled over the room. He flipped to a chart filled with cherry-picked numbers from one of my projects. "These errors," he declared, jabbing at the screen with his finger, "put an entire contract at risk." I wanted to scream. I knew the data was solid. Everyone on my team knew it too. But this wasn't about mistakes. This was about him trying to humiliate me, again, only this time in front of the entire company. The room was dead quiet. Then Victor dropped the hammer. "Effective immediately," he said coldly. "Ava Monroe will be terminated." He turned toward the back. Security, be ready to escort her out after the meeting. For a second, it felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm. From the corner of my eye, I saw Nina start to rise from her seat, ready to speak up. But I raised my hand slightly, signaling her to sit back down. I wasn't going to let Victor turn this into a circus. HR Director Tanya Rhodes shifted in her chair, looking blindsided. Victor, she began carefully. I wasn't aware. He cut her off. The paperwork will be finalized after this. Just confirm it for the record. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward me, then back to him. The entire room seemed frozen, waiting. And then he said it, the line he loved to use whenever he thought he'd won. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with arrogance. You don't belong here, Ava. He smirked, waiting for the usual awkward chuckles from the staff. But none came. I sat still, staring straight ahead, every ounce of me fighting to stay composed. Inside, though, I could feel a fire rising. He thought he was ending me in that moment, thought he'd humiliated me for the last time. What he didn't know was that he had just set the stage for his own downfall. I stood up slowly, every pair of eyes following me as I walked toward the microphone. My hands didn't shake, though my heart was pounding hard in my chest. Tanya, I said softly, my voice carrying just enough to be heard across the room, would you please start an official recording of this meeting? She blinked, surprised, then nodded and reached for her tablet. Victor let out a short laugh. What are you doing, Ava? This isn't your show. I ignored him and turned instead to Elijah Rowe, the CFO, who was sitting near the front row flipping through a binder. Elijah, I'd appreciate if you stayed present for this next part. He frowned slightly, confused, but gave me a nod. I opened the plain manila folder I'd carried with me, the one I'd hidden under my keyboard for months. Inside were pages neatly stacked, purchase confirmations, transfer agent letters, proxy agreements with signatures in blue ink. I pulled them out slowly, carefully, so everyone could see. I need to clarify something, I said, my voice steady. I'm not just an employee at Halcyon Venture Systems. I'm also a shareholder. A ripple went through the crowd, soft gasps, murmurs, heads turning toward one another. Victor's smile faltered. I laid the documents across the podium. Over the past year, I've purchased and acquired a significant personal stake in this company. And in addition, I hold proxy agreements from other shareholders who have entrusted me to represent their votes. Victor barked out a laugh, but it sounded strained. What is this nonsense? The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the projector. Elijah Rowe, the CFO, leaned forward in his seat, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the copies of my documents. He pulled out his phone, checking the transaction numbers against the company's record. After a long pause, he looked up, adjusting his glasses. These are legitimate, he said firmly. Every number checks out. That one sentence hit harder than anything else. I saw it on Victor's face, the way his confidence cracked, his jaw clenched, his skin paling as if the ground beneath him had shifted. For once, he didn't have a quick comeback. Tanya, the HR director, cleared her throat and spoke into the tablet she was recording with. Let the record show that Monroe's documents have been verified by the chief financial officer. Also, for legal purposes, any attempt at retaliation during a pending shareholder action could be considered misconduct. Her voice was steady, professional, but I caught the hint of relief in her eye. Victor snapped his head toward her. You can't be serious, Tanya. She's nothing but a... But before he could finish, the conference screen at the front flickered on. A familiar voice filled the room. That's enough, Victor. It was board chair Marjorie Hale, joining via video call. The room collectively straightened. All eyes on the woman whose word carried more weight than anyone else in that building. Marjorie's face was calm, almost icy. I've reviewed Miss Monroe's filings personally. A special shareholders meeting has already been confirmed. Effective immediately, interim measures will be taken until that vote occurs. She paused, letting her words sink in. Victor, your behavior today is unacceptable. Victor's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He tried again, sputtering. Marjorie, she's manipulating. But legal counsel Evelyn Price, seated a few rows back, cut him off. The law is clear. Any termination or disciplinary action against Miss Monroe is frozen pending the outcome of the shareholder vote. If you push further, Victor, you expose yourself and the company to liability. The silence that followed was deafening. Employees shifted, whispers spreading like a current through the auditorium. For the first time, their eyes weren't darting nervously toward Victor. They were fixed on me. I stood tall, refusing to look away from him. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a tight line, but his eyes told the truth. Fear. The man who had spent months tearing me down was realizing in real time that the power he clung to wasn't his anymore. The whispers grew louder, people leaning in to each other, murmuring about shares, votes, and leadership changes. And in that moment, I understood it fully. The balance had shifted. Victor wasn't the force commanding the room anymore. Victor didn't say another word. He just stood there, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of the podium like it was the only thing holding him upright. The man who used to roar across the office, who loved making me small, couldn't even meet my eyes now. For the first time, he looked powerless. Marjorie's voice carried through the speakers one last time. Effective immediately, Victor Lang is placed on administrative leave pending the shareholder vote. Interim operations leadership will be reassigned. She gave me the faintest nod through the screen. Ms. Monroe, thank you for your diligence. Then the screen went dark. The entire room seemed frozen in disbelief. I closed my folder and stepped back, my heart hammering, though my hands never trembled. I turned to the staff, all of them staring at me as if they were seeing me for the first time. I know this is a lot to process, I said quietly, but we'll be okay. Keep doing your work. Things are changing, but for the better. Nina, who had always tried to defend me in small ways, stood and walked toward me. She squeezed my hand, her voice low but firm. You did it, Ava. You actually did it. I gave her a small smile, fighting the lump in my throat. Caleb spoke up from the back. We've got your back. His words seemed to unlock the tension in the room. A few others nodded. Someone whispered, "About time," and a ripple of agreement spread through the rows. Victor tried to speak again, but his voice cracked, and Evelyn, the legal counsel, stepped forward. Victor, you need to leave now. The look on his face was something I'll never forget, rage mixing with disbelief, like he couldn't understand how the control he once had slipped through his fingers. But he left, shoulders stiff, every eye watching him, until the door shut behind him. I stayed standing at the front for a moment longer, letting the silence settle. Then I nodded once and said, "Thank you, everyone. That's all." My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. As people filed out, the atmosphere felt different, lighter, almost like the air itself was easier to breathe. The same employees who used to keep their heads down around Victor now looked at me with something I'd never seen before. I walked back to my desk, past the supply closet where I'd been shoved like I was nothing. I didn't even glance at it this time. That corner didn't define me anymore. I stopped at the glass-walled conference room, the one that always felt out of reach, and pushed the door open. For the first time, it wasn't Victor's space. It was mine. The office was quiet, almost reverent, the sound of keyboards starting up again filling the room as people returned to work. Order was returning, but it was different now. They all knew who held the real power, and so did I. And that's how I proved I did belong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It really helps. I'd love to hear your own experiences too. Have you ever been underestimated or pushed aside? Share your story in the comments so we can all connect. More stories of revenge, drama, and life lessons are on the way, so stay with me. Thank you for watching.